Syria, beyond the words and beyond what is happening, are you going to send some special forces as well to Syria? Are you considering some ground intervention there? Mr. President, beyond the emotion that we can feel here, beyond these beautiful statements, for more than a year we've heard all of you saying that Assad must go, that a political transition is necessary in Syria. Mr. President, can you today here in front of us tell us a specific date, a deadline for Assad to go?
I just, you said president. Good. We got two presidents. Okay.
La date.
I will not provide you with a date because it must be as soon as possible. That is one of the requirements for a solution to be found. But at the same time, allow me to underline something. There is a new mindset now. The crisis in Syria has been ongoing for 4 years. 4 years. There are probably more than 300,000 dead. And this is not just relevant to the countries of the region which are hosting the refugees. It is relevant to Europe and the entire world now with that issue of refugees. And those who believe that we could wait some more and that in any case it was far away, they now realize that we have an influx of refugees, that the terrorists, the risk is everywhere due to Daesh. We therefore must act. You also asked me what we were going to do. What more? We will intensify the strikes. We will have some more specific target to make sure that Daesh resources, their means, are cut off, including their command centers, the trucks carrying oil, their training centers where they prepare terror attacks. We will continue and we will intensify our strikes at the heart of the cities which are currently in the hands of Daesh. France will not intervene militarily on the ground. It is for the local forces to do so. We've been supporting them for a number of months. We will continue to do so, and they will do the job on the ground after our strikes that will enable them to do so. But France will take its responsibilities regarding that support, which is absolutely necessary.
Let me just make a couple of broader comments about the operations against ISIL. As was already indicated, we've taken thousands of strikes. We've taken thousands of ISIL fighters, including top commanders and leaders, off the battlefield. We have squeezed their supply lines. We have empowered and armed local groups that are pushing against them, including most recently in Sinjar. And we're providing training and assistance to the Iraqi government as they prepare to retake places like Ramadi that had been overrun. We've seen some success, but the question now is how can we accelerate it? And in fact, even before the tragedy in Paris, I had gathered together my national security forces. It had been a year to review where we had made progress, what worked, what did not, and had put together a plan to accelerate and advance the pressure that we can place on ISIL. And we intend to execute on those plans, but we also think, as Francois said, that there may be new openness on the part of other coalition members to help resource and provide additional assistance, both to the coalition as a whole and to local forces on the ground. With respect to Mr. Assad, I think we've got to let the Vienna process play itself out. It is our best opportunity. And so, the notion that there would be an immediate date in advance of us getting a broad agreement on that political process and the details, I think, doesn't make sense. As soon as we have a framework for political transition, potentially a new constitution, elections, I think it's in that context that we can start looking at Mr. Assad choosing not to run and potentially seeing a new Syria emerge. But it's going to be hard, and we should not be under any illusions. Syria has broken down. It began to break down the moment that Mr. Assad started killing indiscriminately his own people. ISIL was able to move into Raqqa in part because of a thorough rejection on the part of many Syrians of the Assad regime, and a power vacuum emerged. And it is going to be a difficult, long, methodical process to bring back together various factions within Syria to maintain a Syrian state and institutions, and to create the kind of stability that allows people to start coming back in and rebuilding their lives. But it's possible. And the urgency that we've seen even before Paris out of countries like Russia indicate that they recognize they can't be there too long and ultimately win a military battle successfully. Olivier Knox, Yahoo News.
Thank you, Mr. President. Monsieur le Président, bonjour et merci. Mr. President, could you tell us whether the Russian plane did in fact breach Turkish airspace? And given the fury of the Russian response on economic, diplomatic, and rhetorical fronts, how concerned are you that there might also be a military component, if not in Turkey, then perhaps with expanded action against coalition interests inside Syria? Et à vous, Monsieur le Président, les mesures que vous avez...
And Mr. President, regarding the measures you've announced today when it comes to strengthening the cooperation on military intelligence and all this, had they been taken a month or weeks ago, do you think they would have prevented terror attacks that took place in Paris, or will enable us to prevent some further terror attacks?
We don't have all the information yet, so I don't want to comment on the specifics. We will be gathering all that information. We expect the Turks to provide information. I'm sure the Russians will have some information, and we'll be able to confirm what happened in part through our own intelligence and our own tracking of that border area. As Francois indicated, my top priority is going to be to ensure that this does not escalate. And hopefully this is a moment in which all parties can step back and make a determination as to how their interests are best served. The Russians had several hundred people of their own killed by ISIL. And the flow of foreign fighters out of Russian areas into Syria poses an enormous long-term threat to Russian territory. So there is a potential convergence of interests between the various parties. It requires us working with them to make the kind of strategic shift that's necessary, and that frankly I've talked to Putin about for 5 years now. It requires a recognition that the existing structure cannot gain the legitimacy to stop the war, and until you stop the war, you're going to have a vacuum in which these kinds of terrorist organizations can operate more effectively. Let me say one last thing, because I tracked the question that you posed to President Hollande about what could or could not have been prevented. All of our intelligence personnel here in the United States, across the Atlantic, work tirelessly, as I said earlier, to disrupt plots and prevent terrorist attacks. The vast majority of their successes in disrupting plots are not advertised. You never hear about them. But were it not for the dedication of those intelligence and law enforcement and military professionals, this would be a much more dangerous world. So you have to be careful about speculating about what if and coulda and woulda in a situation like this, because it's hard. You have 8 individuals with light weapons. That's hard. That's a hard thing to track. What is true, though, is that we can do a better job, I think, coordinating between countries. And I've been talking to our European partners for quite some time now about the need for better intelligence sharing, passenger name records, working to ensure that when people enter into Europe, particularly now, that the information across various borders is shared on a timely basis, and you have biometric information and other technologies that can make it more accurate. It doesn't mean it's always going to be 100% foolproof, but we can do better on those fronts. And one of the challenges has been, frankly, in the past several years, that you have different legal traditions, concerns about privacy and civil liberties, all of which are entirely legitimate. I don't think those can be ignored now, because that's part of those are part of the values that make us who we are and that we have to adhere to. But I do think that this is a reminder that this is a dangerous world, and rooting out small bands of terrorist groups who maintain good operational security and are using modern technologies in ways that are hard to track. That's a tough job, and we're all going to have to pool our resources much more effectively together than we have in the past. And I think when Francois goes back to Europe, his leadership, the leadership of other presidents and prime ministers around this issue is going to be as important as anything that we do.
Je voudrais revenir.
Allow me to go back to what Daesh truly is. It is somehow an organization, a terrorist group occupying a territory in Iraq and Syria, killing, and they want to install rules that dishonor humanity. This is what Daesh is doing there, and this is what they're trying to do in other countries everywhere chaos stands. And then we have to deal with the number of networks, more or less organized in a number of countries, that are being used to lead terror attacks, like was the case precisely in Paris. We know that this dreadful plan was prepared in Syria and then organized in a number of countries. And there are also some accomplices in France, given that some of the terrorists are French, those who committed these acts of war. So if we want to tackle terrorism, we must act not only to destroy Daesh where they are, in Syria, in Iraq, but we must also dismantle and destroy these networks. How can we proceed? Well, first of all, militarily, by intensifying our strikes, by taking back these territories, thanks to the local forces on the ground, which we can support by finding a political solution in Syria, by making sure that the territorial integrity of Iraq is restored. This is what we can do. Then, when it comes to protection measures to protect our territory and our people, this is what I announced in France, and this is what we have to do to eradicate these networks and all of these accomplices and those who are present. Some of them just arrived, others have been there for a long time, and they are not necessarily identified as a threat. It is therefore necessary that we strengthen yet further our cooperation in terms of intelligence. The Paris attacks generated a lot of emotion, but that's not enough. Compassion, solidarity, and I take note of it, but we must act. And for a number of days now, I've been trying to convincing all the countries that can act to do so. I met with David Cameron yesterday. He announced that he would take a number of measures to his parliament. That is important. Today I'm here with Barack so that we can act with greater intensity and coherence as well. Tomorrow I will be hosting German Chancellor Angela Merkel so that European countries, including Germany, can face up to their responsibilities, including in terms of military intelligence and police cooperation, and maybe more. I will also travel to Moscow so that Russia can take action against Daesh and only against Daesh. And then I will receive Matteo Renzi, the head of the Italian government. I will also have an opportunity to talk to all of the European leaders, given that a European Council together with Turkey will be held on Sunday. So it is all of that that must get together and enable us to implement coordination, cooperation in all actions so that we can act on the source, Daesh, and the networks that they can use. It is that strength that will enable us to succeed. A question from BFM TV. Both of you today have talked about coordination, cooperation against Daesh. Does it mean that the single coalition which you mentioned last week, President Hollande, is gone, that it is inconceivable to have the Russians and the Americans to work together under the single command? And then Bashar al-Assad, you said you could not put a date on his departure. Does it mean that his departure is not a preamble, a prerequisite for the future of Syria? Regarding the coalition of the international community, I believe that the resolution approved by all at the Security Council enables us to say that now the entire world is committed to fighting against Daesh. Then, and this is what I will check when I travel to Moscow, we need one single goal, that is to tackle terrorism and fight against Daesh militarily, and I believe that we can have some further cooperation and coordination militarily to do more. At the same time, we have to be clear when it comes to the political solution, the one that will enable us to find an outcome for Syria. And in this respect, like we've said, and we can repeat it, Bashar al-Assad cannot be the future of Syria. In Vienna, we're already working with all of the countries, even though they do not have the same stance. Turkey, Iran, Gulf countries, the United States, France, and of course all of those who are meant to find a solution. But we must work on that transition. A transition where Bashar al-Assad plays no role, because he's been the problem, so he cannot be the solution.
quickly. We've got a coalition of 65 countries who've been active in pushing back against ISIL for quite some time. France has been a central part of that coalition, as have European countries, Arab countries, countries as far-flung as Australia, and countries in Southeast Asia are part of that coalition. Russia right now is a coalition of two, Iran and Russia, supporting Assad. Given Russia's military capabilities and given the influence they have on the Assad regime, them cooperating would be enormously helpful in bringing about a resolution of the civil war in Syria and allow us all to refocus our attention on ISIL. But I think it's important to remember that you've got a global coalition organized. Russia's the outlier. We hope that they refocus their attention on what is the most substantial threat, and that they serve as a constructive partner. And if and when they do, it will make it easier for us to go after ISIL and Daesh. Although I think it's also important to recognize that the kinds of airstrikes that they're carrying out, just like the kinds of airstrikes that we're carrying out, in and of themselves are not sufficient. And the work that we do to bolster local fighting forces, the cutting off of supply lines, financing, oil, reducing the flow of foreign fighters, the intelligence work that needs to be done. All that is something that we are doing now and that they can supplement. But that's going to be a process that involves hard, methodical work. It's not going to be something that happens just because suddenly we take a few more airstrikes. And that's the kind of hard work that I know France is prepared to do, the United States is prepared to do, and perhaps in the future Russia will be as well. Okay? Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, so that is the end of the President Barack Obama, and he's holding a joint conference with President Hollande of France. So those are some of the plans. What they're going to try and do is work with the 64 United countries, and including France and the United States, to figure out a solution to ISIS. And of course, we don't want to do it alone. Amen. And we're just going to wait and see what's happening with them, all right, what they're going to do. And as we hear from them, we'll put it out there to you, try and go live each and every time. And this is Kathy Brox for LUTG Radio's WKKP Digital Broadcasting.